Alright guys, we are back, and today we need to talk about this Arizona Cardinals team because they are not getting the love that they deserve. Yes, I understand they went 4-13 and completely got destroyed within the division, but this was a team that I had zero expectations for, and for them to win 4 games, in my opinion, was pretty impressive. And when you look at this team and the way they are currently constructed, there are a ton of positives to look at. So without talking too much, let's start talking about the Arizona Cardinals. And I think the best way to start off this video is by talking about all the pros and cons of this team. We'll start off with the cons because I think there's a lot less cons than a lot of people might think. The biggest con of this team is that the defense needs a lot of work. This is a defense that doesn't get a lot of pressure on the quarterback. They also suck against the run. They also have no cornerback one, and their linebackers outside of Kaiser White, who is currently injured, are kind of mediocre. So of course, this is a rebuilding team. They are going to have to address these problems. The next big problem I have for this team is that their offensive line is just kind of mediocre. Will Hernandez and Paris Johnson on the right side have been pretty decent for the most part, but the left tackle spot has been very weak the entire season, even after the injuries to DJ Humphries. So they are desperately going to have to address that spot this upcoming offseason. And another thing offensively is they really do need a receiver one. We've seen progress from guys like Rondell Moore and Michael Wilson, but they really need a receiver one who could just go in there and get a bunch of targets and a bunch of yards. Obviously, the injury to Hollywood Brown definitely did hurt them, but I don't think even when he was playing all that well, especially at a receiver one level. So I think getting a legitimate Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins like receiver is going to be a big need for them to do. And that's the majority of their cons. Do I think their coaching staff is phenomenal? No, I like Jonathan Gannon, but I don't think he's fantastic. I do think getting a new offensive coordinator / defensive coordinator is still in the books, but I think there were some definitely good signs for them to stick around for another year. For the most part, this is kind of an untalented team, so for them to get this much production out of them is pretty good. What I will say is that they have a short leash in my opinion. Give them 2 to 3 more years, or if even that, and we'll see from there. Now on to the more positive things, and I actually have a lot more than what you might think. For starters, and maybe more importantly, you have your head coach and you have your franchise quarterback. Jonathan Gannon, as I said, has a bit of a short leash, but I think for him, it's a little bit longer than guys like his offensive coordinator and his defensive coordinator. And for him to get 4 wins and to be very competitive throughout most of the season was pretty impressive. Kyler Murray came in and played fantastic, and I think for the most part that he is their franchise guy moving forward. I know they have an early draft pick and they're in prime position to get one of the top 5 quarterbacks in this draft, but I think Kyler Murray, as of today, saved his job. Now, if there's another team that wants to give up 4 or 5 first-round picks for him, then I'm sorry, Kyler Murray, you're gone, but no team is going to do that. The next big positive for this team is that they are currently ahead of schedule. Everyone thought, including myself, that this team was at maximum going to win 2 games, but they won 4. And when you look at the roster, a lot of the guys that we weren't expecting to take jumps kind of did a decent job this year. Again, the offensive line wasn't absolutely bad. I think you saw some good things within the secondary and some good things along the defensive line as well. Now, did any of those guys prove to be cornerstone pieces? I don't think so, but we'll have to wait and see. The next big thing, and these are 2 guys who did cement themselves to be potentially cornerstones for this roster, is Trey McBride, the tight end, and Michael Wilson. Trey McBride had a sneaky good year and arguably could have been a Pro Bowler. I had no clue how good he was doing until about 5 weeks ago when I looked up his stats and I was like, holy cow, this guy's actually killing it. On the year, McBride had 81 catches for 825 yards and 3 touchdowns, and I was very impressed with his production. I expect him moving forward to be a big part of this offense, especially with Kyler Murray looking to solidify a legitimate target. A lot of those same things can also be said for Michael Wilson, who showed that he can be a competent receiver. For a 3rd round pick, for him to have 38 catches and 565 yards and 3 touchdowns, I like what I saw from him. He is only 23 years old, and I think for the most part, he has a pretty bright future in the NFL. Will he ever be a receiver 1 or even a receiver 2? I don't think so, but if he can play the Tyler Boyd-like role for this roster, I think they would definitely take that. The next big positive is that they have a ton of draft picks to work with this year. In fact, as it sits today, they have the number 4 pick, and they're also going to have the Houston Texans pick, and they have 6 total picks in the first 3 rounds. And while Houston's success is obviously at the detriment of the draft pick, they are still going to have at least 2 first-round picks and more than likely a top 25 pick with Houston's, so they can get 2 premier talents in a very loaded draft class. And the last pro I have is that they have a ton of cap space to work with. Based on everything I've heard, they're going to have at least $70 million in cap space, but that number will go down after they sign a couple guys. I also expect them to bring back a guy in Budda Baker and potentially Hollywood Brown, so if you take about another $15 million off, they're looking at about $55 million. And with a free agency class that doesn't really have the star power, that kind of bodes well for Arizona. They really just need a bunch of role players to play a certain role. Now, moving on from the pros and cons, let's actually talk about the free agency. As I said, about $70 million in cap space, but they do have a couple potential players they're going to want to bring back. Budda Buda Baker is currently on a club option, and I do imagine that they are going to try to bring him back. He is only 28 years old and had a pretty solid season, all things considered. Hollywood Brown is also potentially gone. Again, I don't really see them giving him a massive contract, so I do think it is going to be depending on what he wants. If he asks for anything more than $12 million, I seriously doubt that Arizona is going to give him that contract. And I think given the fact they are going to have a top 4 pick, I don't really think it's that big of a need for them to bring him back. Some other names that might be gone are Ezekiel Turner, Carlos Watkins, Antonio Hamilton, Aaron Brewer, LJ Collier, Marlon Mack, Chris Barnes, Greg Dortch, and Daryl Baker Jr. A lot of those guys are just depth options for them, but some of them are true-time starters, so I do imagine a couple of those names will be brought back this year. And based off everything that I've been reading, it sounds like a lot of those guys will be gone next year, and I think that makes a lot of sense because, again, you're not going to be paying a ton of money to a bunch of low-level starters. So I have a list of about 6 guys who I think this team should definitely go after. This ranges from cornerbacks to linebackers to offensive linemen and so on and so forth. Some of these guys even have connections to Jonathan Gannon and the front office, so some of these guys are possibilities for people they might go after. And a bit of a side note, this is a franchise that typically doesn't want to spend a whole lot in free agency, so some of these names might be a little unrealistic unless they want to actually hand out some cash this time around, but nonetheless, I will read them. The number 1 name I have for them is CJ Gardner-Johnson. I definitely do think he could bring in a presence this defense might need. They already have a little bit of swagger to them, but if they bring in a guy like CJ who can come in and play the slot and also be a little bit of a flexible player who can also play the safety, that might fill in a couple of spots they might need. He also does have a connection with Jonathan Gannon where he had a bunch of interceptions in his year with Philadelphia. I know he's been dealing with some injuries, but I do think that the Arizona Cardinals should be going after him. It would just depend on how much money he actually wants. If they can't get him, I have a little bit more of an unrealistic pick here, but he does have some connections with the front office, and that is Kendall Fuller. He is more of a slot corner but can play on the outside. Again, I do think the slot corner needs to be a priority for this team, and I also do think that having flexible cornerbacks is definitely a good thing as well. He might be a little bit more expensive than what you might want to pay, but I do think if they can get him, they should definitely go for him. Next up is Kenny Moore, and again, he has the flexibility to play the slot and also the outside. Kenny Moore has been a consistent threat the entire season, and I do think moving forward he could be a good player for Arizona. Again, might be a little bit expensive, but I do think going after him would be very smart. Next up, I have Jonah Jackson, who is the current guard for the Detroit Lions. If you need somebody to come in there and fill in the offensive line spot, I do think that he could be your guy, especially on the interior, because you are developing some guys, but I do think he can come in there and instantly make an impact. He has the flexibility to play the right guard, left guard, and I think he has played some center at some points. So keep an eye out on Jonah Jackson if he does become available. Next up for your defensive line, I like DJ Reader a lot. I know he's been injured, and I know his production sack-wise hasn't been great, but he is one of the best run-stuffing defensive tackles in the league. For a defense that really struggled against the run, I do think that he could be a legitimate possibility, and I do think his time in Cincinnati is going to be up because currently I don't think Cincinnati has the money to pay the guy. So if Arizona wants to lift out their pockets a little bit, I do think he is a legitimate possibility. The last name I have is Jerome Baker, who is the Miami Dolphins linebacker. He himself has also been dealing with some injuries, but I do think that he would provide a big spark play in that linebackers room. He's good in coverage, he's good in the run, he's a good personality. I would like him a lot for Arizona. So those are just a couple names. I don't really think that Arizona should go out there and just spend a ton of money just to spend it because of the fact they have so many draft picks. I don't really think they're going to have that many holes to fill up in free agency. So if they can find depth options and maybe 2 to 3 or 4 starters, I think that would be a great haul for them this free agency class. But maybe the most important thing is going to be their draft. They have a lot of needs and an ample amount of picks to fill in a couple needs. With their 4th pick, it has got to be either Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors. And I think the consensus is that Marvin Harrison Jr. should be the pick here. It will be interesting to see if Chicago does keep the pick to take Marvin Harrison, but if they don't decide to do that and decide to trade down, I imagine that the Cardinals are going to be in play to get him. He could be somebody who can be that legitimate receiver 1 option, and when you have guys like Trey McBride and Michael Wilson, that can definitely help this receiving core and obviously Kyler Murray out a ton. With their 2nd first-round pick, I think it has got to be some sort of corner, whether it is Kool-Aid McKinstry, Nate Wiggins, Cooper DeJean, or Terrion Arnold. It has got to be one of those 4 guys, and more than likely with that pick, they will have one of those guys available. All 4 of those guys would be instant upgrades in that secondary, and of the 4 guys I mentioned, I actually like Cooper DeJean the most for this team because of his flexibility to both play the cornerback and the safety. So that is what I would do with the Texans' 1st-round pick. Next in the 2nd round, I do think you have a couple options. You only have 1 2nd-round pick, and I think there's a couple names here. I like Tavondre Sweat. I also like Jordan Morgan. If you don't know who Tavondre Sweat is, he's the defensive tackle for Texas, and he is an absolute monster. I am honestly shocked that he's not a 1st-round guy because Tavondre Sweat has the size and the mobility to be a very good run stuffer in this league, and he proved that over and over again this year in Texas. And I think as a pass rusher, he's not going to be super dominant, but I could definitely see him getting up to 4 to 5 sacks a year, which for a big run-stuffing defensive tackle, getting 5 to 6 sacks a year is very impressive. Another name there could be Jordan Morgan, the offensive tackle for Arizona. Assuming he falls to the second round, I do think that he could be in play for the left tackle spot. I also like Graham Barton, the offensive tackle for Duke. He can play offensive tackle or play the inside. I definitely do think he could be that versatile pick up there in the second round. Now for your 3 third-round picks, I don't really have any names for you guys, but I do think the pick should be something along the defensive line, the linebackers core, or even a receiver that might fall. If a receiver like Malachi Corley or Xavier Legette falls that far, I would definitely target them. So again, I don't have any names particularly right now, but I definitely will find some names as I go along this draft study. Thus far, I've only been able to really study the quarterbacks and running backs, and I'm starting to work on receivers right now. So the further the NFL season goes, I'll have more intel on this year's draft. But in totality, the Arizona Cardinals have an extremely bright future. They have a good quarterback, some good pieces on the offense, and all the resources in the world to fix their problems. This is a massive offseason for the Arizona Cardinals, and I think they absolutely have to smash it out of the park for them to be very good next year. I'm not going to go out there and make a bold prediction as to how good they'll be. We have the whole offseason to do that, but I would not be shocked if this is a sneaky good playoff team next year. That is as far as I'll get. But with all that being said, I hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you guys did, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. We are on the road to 10,000 subscribers, so make sure to hit that subscribe button if you're not subscribed. And if you are a Cardinals fan, let me know in the comment section below if I got everything right and if you think my analysis of this team was accurate. And if you were the GM, who would you take in this year's draft? But I love you guys. Peace.